Good morning. It's good to be here with you all this morning. I think I often take our church for granted, and right now especially I'm thinking about how much I'm going to miss being able to come here on Sunday mornings when we move away here in about a month. And I just wanted to express again how much I appreciate you all and the privilege it is to be able to come and gather in this way, especially as I think about having a very, very small group, and hopefully we're able to find more people and make it larger, but you can continue to pray with us about that. All right, this morning I want to share what I hope is a very practical message for all of us, and it comes from a profound sermon that Jesus preached, and it's a sermon that he preached mostly without words. You can go ahead and turn to John chapter 13. The setting here is Jesus at the Last Supper with his disciples. And for a context, remember that just before this, before what we're reading here, Jesus had ridden into Jerusalem on a donkey, and people were spreading palm branches in the way. They were laying their clothing on the street. They were shouting, cheering, and he was coming into a king's welcome. Now, here we have Jesus and his disciples sitting together at this supper, and his disciples, if you read in the other Gospels, his disciples are sitting there arguing about who is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So that's the setting that we're coming into here in John chapter 13, and I'm going to read up until about verse 17. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of the world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. And supper being ended, the devil, having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he was come from God and went to God, he riseth from supper and laid aside his garments, and took a towel and girded himself. After that he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wash them, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Then cometh he to Simon Peter, and Peter saith unto him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? And Jesus answered and said unto him, What I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. Peter saith unto him, Thou shalt never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Simon Peter saith unto him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus saith unto him, He that is washed needeth not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit, and ye are clean, but not all. For he knew who should betray him, therefore he said, Ye are not all clean. So after that he had washed their feet, and he had taken his garments, and was set down again, he said unto them, Know ye what I have done to you? Ye call me Master and Lord, and ye say, Well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that ye should do as I have done to you. Verily, verily, I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him. If ye know these things, happy are ye if ye do them. So here, the context that we talked about before, his disciples were sitting there arguing about who is greatest. And now it's time for Jesus to show them what it means to be a member of the kingdom and how to truly be great. And then he goes ahead and he does this act of washing their feet, and then tells them to do as he has done to them. And I know there's many things that we could pull out of this little account here, many different ways we could go. But what I want to focus on this morning is verse 5, where he said, verse 4, where it says that he rose from supper and he took a towel, and that's why I have the towel up here. And then down in verse 14 and 15, where he says, I washed your feet, you ought also to wash one another's feet. So the title of my message this morning is Take the Towel. And so here we have Jesus. He's taking the towel, one of the lowliest of objects, and he used it as part of a lesson for his disciples. So think about where a towel ranks in your house. It's usually not decorative. It's usually hidden away somewhere. It's only called on when there's a disaster. It's only called on when something is nasty and needs cleaned up. That's where a towel comes in the picture. It's your servant for your messes, basically. So using this symbol of service, Jesus did something unthinkable. Here we have the Messiah, the king, got down and began to wash his disciples' feet. And in our context, washing feet isn't so bad. We take a shower, we clean our feet up good, we put them in socks, we put them in shoes, we get in our cars and we drive to church, and then when we get them out to wash each other's feet, they're still pretty shiny and clean. But it wasn't that way in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, the setting was quite opposite. They wore sandals, and I suppose most of them did. I don't know if there were any shoes and socks back then. They wore sandals, and they walked in the dust, they walked in the heat, they shared the road with animals, and it didn't take much traveling about until feet became very undesirable, I'm sure. We got to experience this a little bit in the camp in Iraq. We would usually wear sandals as we went about our work there, and till the end of the day, you would be wearing quite a bit of the camp on your feet when you got back home. It just wasn't that great. So in Jesus' day, the task of washing feet was usually relegated to the lowest person on the ladder, whether that was a servant or a slave. Some say it was a task that was below the dignity of any Jew to wash another person's feet. And it's interesting that if you go to the Middle East today, feet are still considered very lowly, and to point the bottom of your foot at somebody is actually to curse them. So when we're sitting in a tent or something over there, we have to make sure that we tuck our feet off to the side or get them behind us or underneath us somehow. Because if somebody sees the dirty bottom of your foot, you have just basically cursed at them. So here we have Jesus down on his knees doing something for his disciples that they should have been doing for him instead of arguing about who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So I'm going to focus, as I mentioned, on these verses here, verses 14 and 15. And I'm just going to read them again. I want them settled in our minds before we get into talking about the rest of what I have this morning. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye ought also to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that ye should do as I have done to you. So I think the natural response here to what Jesus did for the disciples probably would be to get up and say, Lord, can we wash your feet? Now you've washed ours. We should have done this. We're sorry. We missed it. Can we wash your feet? But Jesus is saying, don't wash my feet. Wash other people's feet. He said, I've given you an example. Now go do this for your wife, for your children, for your church family, your neighbors, for your enemies, and the list can go on of people who were to be washing feet for. One of Jesus' last messages here to his disciples was that true greatness and leadership is getting down to serve your brother and doing even the dirtiest and ugliest tasks for them. So now to make it practical, I want to talk this morning about how do we take up the towel for each other? How do we truly serve each other? We do it literally in communion. We come together here and we wash each other's feet. But outside of communion, are we being intentional about taking the towel and serving each other? I guess I was really convicted as I thought about this, and I have so much room to grow in serving and taking up the towel for my brothers and sisters outside of doing it, as I mentioned, in communion and just in little ways each day. Just a little further down in John chapter 13, Jesus says that the world will know that we are his by the love that we have for each other. Verse 34 and 35. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. How will the world know that we love each other? Well, this morning I'd like to say that it's by the way that we take up the towel and serve each other. So I'll be reading a number of scriptures this morning throughout, and you can feel free to turn to them if you wish. I'm also just going to jot up here on the board some of the ways that we can take up the towel for each other. So one of the first ways that I want to talk about this morning of taking up the towel is by learning to truly know each other. So I'm just going to put up here, knowing. This is something we talk a lot about, I think. And I know that a lot of you here make a good point of learning to know people, and I really appreciate that. Do we know where our brothers and sisters struggle? Do we know their hopes, their dreams, their fears? Do we know when it's time to step in and affirm what they're doing? Or do we know when they need a word of comfort? It takes a lot of time and effort to learn to know our brothers and sisters the way that Jesus knew people, the way that he modeled. And it takes a lot of time and effort to get to the point where we can, without even asking, sense where they're at in life, when they need that word, when they need a little encouragement. It takes a lot of setting ourselves aside and asking into their lives, do we care enough to really learn to know each other? The less we know about each other, the more easily it is for us to misunderstand and mistrust each other. The Bible has a lot to say about us being members one of another, about us being a body. Romans 12:4-5, for as we have many members in one body, and all members have not the same office, so we, being many, are one body in Christ, and everyone members one of another. 1 Corinthians 12, a few verses throughout there. Verse 12, for as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Christ. In verse 25, that there should be no schism or division in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. Now ye are the body, verse 27, now ye are the body of Christ, and members in particular. You know, we can't expect to function as a body if we distance ourselves from each other, if we don't work together, learn to know each other in deep and meaningful ways. We have to know each other to care well and to understand each other. And on the other side of it, we have to be willing to be known by our brothers and sisters. This goes two ways. We have to humble ourselves and let them learn to know where our weaknesses are and where we need help. Are we willing to share those things? James 5:16 mentions that we should confess our faults one to each other and pray for each other. Do we let people see the real us and our real struggles so that we can be known? And then on the flip side, do we try to learn where people's struggles and battlegrounds, battle lines are? Some of the greatest encouragements that I have ever received are when people sensed when I was struggling with something. They sensed when I was at a low spot. And without me ever mentioning it, they came to my side and had a meaningful word, prayed for me or something like that. So I really struggle with public speaking, actually. I get very, very nervous whenever I'm on to do that. And so there's one of my struggles, now you know. But I was on to speak at one of the Christian Aid open houses a few years ago, and my insides were in a mess. And a coworker stepped up behind me. This was right in the whole assembly there in the warehouse. He stepped up behind me, put his arm around me without ever saying a word or asking. He just said, "Can I pray for you?" And he prayed that God would give me the words to speak and courage to speak them. That was taking up the towel for me in that situation, and that blessed me beyond words. Ironically, he didn't really know me that well, and I didn't really know him that well, but somehow he was sensitive to the Holy Spirit and followed that leading and stepped up beside me and put his arm around me and prayed. So I don't know that Jesus ever specifically says in these words that we should get to know each other deeply, but he did live it. He showed a deep interest in the people that he ministered to, and he lived transparently himself. So I guess the question this morning is, do we care enough to take a true interest in each other? And do we have that humility that it takes to let others really know who we are? Do we get out of our way do we go out of our way to get in each other's way in a good kind of way? I really appreciate, and I'm going to put a plug in for our early morning men's prayer services here. I really have appreciated those times together where we can come together in the middle of the week and just kind of share, what's on our hearts for the day and what we're facing and the struggles for that week or the challenges or whatever. And that's been a really great way for me to get to learn to know my brothers here a lot better than I would have probably in other ways. And so I appreciate all of you who do come out and pray together we pray together for each other, and that's just very meaningful and also very helpful in learning to know. So the second way I want to talk about this morning of taking the towel is by listening. And this goes right along with the first point that I had of knowing each other. And the main way of learning to know each other is by listening. Listening is a way that we can serve each other. Do we listen well? So listening well takes a lot of humility, it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of restraint. It means asking good questions and then being quiet and hearing your brother or sister out, giving them space to speak uninterrupted without diving in with quick solutions or comments. When we serve each other by listening, we should also learn to listen beyond the words. Are we listening deeply enough to understand why our brother is saying the things that he's saying or why he's doing the things that he's doing? And I say brothers, this goes for sisters, this goes for our family, this goes for a lot of people, but basically I'm going to keep using brothers and sisters. That's kind of our context here. It's also for our relatives, our coworkers, and I think it's also especially for people who come through our doors just looking for a listening ear. A lot of people don't have a true listening ear in our world, and actually it's pretty amazing when you start talking with people around us where they really have no one in their lives, and unfortunately for a lot of people in churches, they really don't have anyone to listen either, and that's very sad to me that it is that way. Jesus was the best example of listening to serve and minister. He asked questions and then heard people out in order to know how he could help them. I really like the account where Jesus met Cleopas and his counterpart on the road to Emmaus. Recently we were discussing whether or not this was Cleopas' wife or who it was, but that's beside the point. I'm going to read here Luke 24:13-19. And behold, two of them went the same day to a village called Emmaus, which was from Jerusalem about 80 furlongs, and they talked together of all these things which had happened. And it came to pass that while they communed together and reasoned, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were holden that they should not know him. And he said unto them, What manner of communications are these that ye have one to another as ye walk and are sad? And one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answering, said unto him, Art thou only a stranger in Jerusalem, and hast not known the things which are come to pass there in these days? And he said unto them, What things? I really like how Jesus was asking into their lives here. He was asking good questions, and then if you would read on, he's quiet and he listens while they share all the things that had been happening and the things that they were struggling with. The New Testament is full of accounts of Jesus listening to people's problems, listening to them argue, listening to their confusions, listening to their fears. He would hear them out, and then he would answer in meaningful ways. So I guess my question is, do we listen well enough to hear the heart cry, the longings, the fears of the people around us? Or do we listen well enough to know what they're passionate about? It's easy to listen to those who are outspoken, but do we also listen to those who are quieter? Do we listen well, or do we ask questions and then let our attention wander, our mind wander, our attention go away, or try to think of our next response? I'm sure that we've all had that experience where somebody will come to you and ask what seems to be a meaningful question, and then as you go about answering it, you see their eyes start roaming around somewhere behind you, and you know that they don't really care about listening to you. You know that they don't really care about what they just ask you. And so we can take the towel in this way by listening to our brothers well. And I guess I challenge us all this morning, to listen well and to serve each other, to put on the towel in that way as well. So the third one I want to talk about this morning is bearing each other's burdens. Probably the first place where our minds go when we think about bearing each other's burdens is the verse in Galatians 6, verse 2, where Paul says, "Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." In this context here, it's bearing spiritual burdens and helping to restore a brother who was caught in a fault. But I think our burden bearing should go a whole lot further than that as well, into physical things. There's spiritual burdens. As mentioned here, there are financial burdens, there's health burdens, there's everyday physical burdens of work and responsibility. We all have burdens. Burden bearing also requires a lot of intentionality from us. It requires us to be actively looking around at our brothers and seeing, with the intent of seeing burdens that we could help them bear. I think that's true burden bearing. I was blessed by a burden bearer just recently. I was in Guatemala, and I heard that there was a lot of rain coming down up here. I think it was over the time of the hurricane. And I was a little bit worried about my basement, and so I messaged Anthony. I said, "Are we getting all the rain that I'm hearing about?" And I found out that he had gone over and checked my basement, found that water was coming in without telling me. He had set up a pump, he had mixed up some concrete, patched up the hole, and taken care of it. This was all before I ever asked him to go check it. That is a good example of taking up the towel and bearing burdens. And I was really blessed by that, so thank you, Anthony. I really appreciate that. Do we wait around for a call, or do we have an eye on our brothers and step in to help when we see that they're being overwhelmed? Philippians 2:2-4 says, "Fulfill ye my joy, that ye be like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord and of one mind. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man on the things of others." Here it says to look on the things of others. Am I as concerned about my brother's cares, my brother's burdens, my sister's cares or burdens as I am about my own things? I think if I truly got to that point, it would really revolutionize the way I related to my brothers. And so I hope that I can get closer to that. Do I care as much about Delbert's burdens, the things that he's running into, as I care about my own, or that goes for any one of us? I really like the way that we bear each other's burdens financially here. I think that we do a good job at that, and I'm really blessed how, in our brothers' meetings we go around and we say, is there any medical needs that need taken care of, that anybody needs help with, and also just the giving of gifts as well. That blesses me. How are we doing with spiritual burdens? Are we watching each other close enough to see when we get into hard times? Can we tell when someone is lonely or struggling or facing a temptation or discouragement? Spiritual burdens are often hard to deal with. There's no clear answers, but that's no excuse for not getting involved to help bear those burdens. When we hear somebody mention a spiritual burden, whether it be just in a passing conversation or here in a meeting at church, do we distance ourselves and hope that somebody else might have heard it too, and that they'll go to help? Or do we run to help these people? Do we run to go and I say help. Helping might just be simply listening to them, just acknowledging that you heard that they're bearing a burden. That's very valuable as well. To spot burdens, we have to put ourselves in each other's shoes and ask, how would I feel if I were facing the same thing? And what would I want others to do for me? And then go do that for them. So I challenge us to learn to know when our brothers or sisters are getting weighed down, or when our coworkers are getting weighed down. When they're going through, if they're going through circumstances that look rough, just go and ask how they're handling it, how are they dealing with it. Sometimes bearing burdens might mean just showing up at someone's place to lend a hand rather than asking if they need help. And if you're like me, you're a little bit slow to ask for help when you really could or should have some. Matthew 7:12, I think, says it the best. Therefore, all things whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. This verse here is proactive. It's doing something for somebody else before they ever do it to you. And I think that's how we ought to be taking up the towel. That's how we ought to be bearing the burden, bearing our brothers' burdens. And then we can also bear burdens by praying for somebody, or even better, with someone. I mentioned my experience with that. James 5:16 says, in the context of confessing our faults, I mentioned it already in the context of confessing our faults, but Paul goes on to say that we should pray for one another that we would be healed. And then the verse just after that says, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And I have to think back again to my own experiences with this, how many times when I was overseas, when I was in Iraq, how I would open my WhatsApp and I would see a message from a church brother, and I would listen to it, and it was just simply them praying for me. No words, just simply a prayer that God would help me through whatever I'm facing. They didn't know. They just felt led to pray this prayer. That God would help me through whatever I'm facing that day. And some days I wasn't really facing much out of the ordinary, but it still just blessed me. It helped me it gave me a shot in the arm and just helped me to go on. It was a great way of helping to bear my burdens, even from a distance. And then there's times where my friends, maybe before I was going or if I was facing something, would just gather around and lay their hands on and pray for me. Jesus prayed for his disciples in John 17, and I just love the prayer. It's a beautiful prayer that God would keep them. In verse 16, he says, I pray not that thou shouldest take them out of the world, but thou shouldest keep them from evil. And back to our verse for the day, I have given you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Let's bear each other's burdens like Jesus bore ours. The next one I want to focus on this morning is empathizing. The definition of empathize is to understand and to share the feelings of others. And this could go along with some of the other points, like bearing burdens, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it is important that we know how to genuinely identify with someone in their situation, whether it's good or bad. It's a powerful way of serving our brothers and sisters. For most of my life, for example, I couldn't identify really with people who spent time in the hospital because I had never done it. And then I had the chance to spend a couple of days, 2 different times in the hospital. Now I can empathize with people who are spending time in the hospital. I still don't know what it's like to spend an extended period of time, but I know what it's like to lay in a hospital bed, to be wired up and not be able to go anywhere. And now I can feel for those people. So, and I think in the same way, like sometimes it's hard to empathize just because we can't relate to the situation. And that happened for me many times when I was overseas. I would hear stories of people who had been, through the war, their house was bombed or something like that. And I just can't relate to that. I don't know what that's like. But I think that we should be praying and asking God to help us understand, to be able to feel deeply with our brothers and sisters. I couldn't really empathize well with people who had COVID until recently. I could sympathize with them, but I didn't really know what it was like until just recently. Now I feel like I can empathize with people who have COVID. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. as I mentioned, I struggle with this. I struggle to really feel with people the way I should. And Jesus just did this so well. He wept with people. He would feel that he took their burdens on him, and he even says to cast our burdens on him. And it's just a beautiful thing when we're able to weep and rejoice with each other. It's a beautiful thing when we feel deeply enough to cry with somebody or genuinely be able to enter into their celebration of whatever thing in life they're facing right now. And again, I just encourage us all to ask God to help us to really feel and understand with each other. And if we struggle with that, pray and ask God to give us the ability to do that better. In all these areas that I'm mentioning, we really need the Spirit of God to fill us, to enable us to take the towel and serve each other. And I think Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 3, has the key to this. And also, I was really blessed, the first song that we sang this morning, actually, verse number 2 says, "And seek that infilling of power from above that fits us for service and fills us with love." So Isaiah 61, verses 1 to 3 here. "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn, to appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, and the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified." With the Spirit of God in us, filling us, we can listen well, we can see burdens easily, we can empathize well, we can feel with the brokenhearted and the captive, and we can help to bring healing and liberty, and we can also help to bring unity where there's disunity. And so I guess my prayer for myself is that the Spirit of God would fill me to the point where I can truly serve. I can go beyond the surface and take the towel, get down on my knees for my brothers and sisters, and really serve them in the humble way that Jesus served his disciples. The next one I want to look at this morning is wrestling. And this often isn't a good thing necessarily. But when I say wrestling, I'm talking about helping each other stay on the offensive and helping each other win the battles that we're all facing. Getting in the fray to help your brothers win is a great way to serve like Jesus did, and I really like the phrase that I hear tossed around here. I shouldn't say tossed. The phrase that I hear used around here, "Are you winning?" And the reply, "I am winning." I think that's what I'm talking about, is helping each other win, getting in the struggle with each other. Another part of wrestling together is helping each other identify trouble spots. In order to wrestle together, we also need to be humble enough to let other people get into our personal space. Again, back to knowing each other, they need to know where we face our battles, where we face our struggles. That way they can wrestle with us. I think a great illustration of helping each other wrestle, serving each other by wrestling with each other, is the game of tug of war. You know, when you're all leaning into the rope against the opposing force, and you're all in that struggle together, you're pulling, and the opposing force starts to pull you their direction across the line, and other people come and jump in, and you go arm to arm, shoulder to shoulder, and you start pulling back the other way. I guess that's the picture I get here when I think of wrestling with each other, helping each other to overcome, and seeing when there's a need for that, and running to get in the line and to help pull as well. Last Sunday, and this Sunday it was mentioned again as well, we talked about enduring hardness as a good soldier. 2 Timothy 2:3, "Thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ." And wrestling is helping each other get through those hardships, through the rough days. Wrestling is just helping each other to hold on to the faith, and more than that, it's also pushing each other to good works. Hebrews 10:23-25. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as ye see the day approaching. So we see the words in here, holding fast, provoking, which means in other translations it said stirring up, and exhorting one another. That's wrestling together. That's wrestling for each other and with each other. We also need to wrestle alongside those who are weak in the faith, those who are seeking, or maybe those who are doubting. And one key way of doing this, I think, is for the older brothers and sisters among us to share with us younger ones candidly. Tell us where you face struggles and how you overcame them. And that goes for all of us, no matter where we are at. There's somebody below us that we can help by sharing our experiences. And that's another good way that we can wrestle. I've been so blessed by older brothers in my life who were very honest and said, when I was your age or back then, I struggled with this as well too. You're not alone. It's a common problem that we face, and that is key. That goes for both sides here. If we can share those experiences that we have had, the people that are younger than us, they don't have to experience it all themselves if we help them through it. Let's help each other wrestle. 1 Thessalonians 5:14 says, now we exhort you, brethren, warn them that are unruly, comfort the feeble-minded, and support the weak. Be patient toward all men. Jesus is a perfect example of wrestling alongside his disciples and encouraging them, helping them overcome their doubt, stirring them up to good works. I think that Jesus had quite the battle on his hands with Peter, probably. That's the one we hear the most about. Just, wrestling through things with him all the time. And so let's help each other wrestle to win. And then there's many, many more that we could talk about this morning. Many more ways of taking the towel figuratively and serving our brothers and helping them get through. The last one I want to talk about this morning is sacrificing. How much are we willing to sacrifice to serve each other and help each other be successful in life? And how much will we sacrifice to win another soul to Christ? John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Here we have God giving his only Son. We have Jesus giving up his position in heaven on the throne, and we have Jesus ultimately giving up his life to offer us eternal life. And then just shortly after Jesus washed his feet, he said to his disciples, shortly after Jesus washed his disciples' feet, he said to them, he said, greater love hath no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends. And there's so many stories out there of this happening. I have to think of two acquaintances of mine from Iraq. They were working with another group. They were doing humanitarian aid. They got into a situation where they were between the two lines, and there was a family caught in a firefight. And they went out there, and they drove their vehicles out there. They got out of the vehicle to help them, and the first one was a translator. As he was helping them, he was shot multiple times. And then the driver, who was an Iraqi soldier, got out of the vehicle as well. And in helping the translator, he took, I think, 6 bullets into his body, one through his neck. Both of these men just completely laid down their lives for the sake of one little family that was caught out there in the firefight. They put themselves on the line. The translator actually died a few weeks later. The Iraqi soldier, thank God, came to the truth and is now a believer in Jesus and is following Christ. And it's such a beautiful story. But I'm awed when I hear stories like that. What gets you out of comfort out of the safety of an armored vehicle into a firefight to pick up a little girl or an old man? What does that? But shouldn't we be doing the same thing? Shouldn't we be, maybe we don't have a chance to do it in ways that, or maybe at this point we don't have a chance to do it in ways that would put our physical life on the line, but are we doing it in sacrificing ourselves and our time? I find myself struggling even to make these small little sacrifices for my brothers and sisters. Shouldn't we be known as people who will lay down our lives, our schedules, our wills, our resources for our families and friends and enemies, people we don't know? Isaiah describes true religion in chapter 58, and I'd like to read verses 6 and 7 there. This describes a life of self-sacrificing. Isaiah 58, 6 and 7, "Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, that ye break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out into thy house, when thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh?" These things don't happen if we're living for ourselves. These things flow out of a life that is self-sacrificing, a life that is serving, that is taking up that towel, kneeling down and washing feet. Will Jesus be able to say that we've walked in his footsteps and came not to be ministered to, but rather to minister to each other? Will he be able to say that you've given your life, you've sacrificed for your brothers and sisters, you've sacrificed to bring souls into the kingdom? And so, in conclusion this morning, I know I didn't really say anything really new. It's all stuff that we've heard for a long time. But personally, I needed this reminder again of what it means to truly take up that towel, to put it on, to get down and to serve my brothers and sisters in practical ways every day of my life. And I hope that it was a challenge to you all this morning as well, too, to do the same thing. What I find myself doing is I'll read these things, I'll study this, and I'm all energized to do it for a while, and then after a while I start losing speed, and then I'm back to living for myself again. So I guess my burden is that I could just get this deep into my heart, and for us all to have it deep in our heart, to just be on the lookout for each other, to be serving each other, to be going out of our way, and also then on the flip side, allowing each other to do that for us. Who decides when we serve others? Do we make decisions that fit our schedules, or is it the Holy Spirit in us deciding when we serve others, even if it doesn't fit our well-ordered and scheduled lives? And as I mentioned, it takes two. It takes an agreement for there to be a feet washing. It takes the Spirit-led to put on the towel and to get down and serve, and it takes the humble to recognize that they need that to be done for them, that they need that assistance. If we are people of the towel, the world will see Jesus when they see us. And that's just what I want to leave us with today. Are there any comments?